Welcome back to the Den of Episodes. I'm Marlo Fox, and this is your cozy little corner of the internet. Now more than ever, this podcast is here to give you a few minutes away from the troubles in the world or your own backyard. So grab your cup of coffee or tea, settle into your coziest chair or your favorite corner of the sofa while we get caught up with Archie and the rest at Glenbogle. I have to say, I cannot believe this is the last episode of Season 1, and it's been a whole new way of watching a show for me to really pay close attention to every scene, knowing that I'm going to talk about it on the show. So I'm having a blast. I hope you are too, and I'm looking forward to getting into Season 2. Our spotlight of the week is on Anna Wilson-Jones, who plays Justine Thatcher, Archie's girlfriend. Anna was born October 8, 1970 in Surrey, England, which makes her 55 years old. She's married to fellow actor Steve John Shepherd, and they have 3 children. She has 106 acting credits to her name and has multiple projects in the works. Justine represents the life Archie left behind when he returned to Glenbogle. She's confident, sharp, and very much at home in the fast-paced London restaurant world. Throughout the season, she's been the symbol of Archie's other life, one that doesn't involve muddy boots and collapsing estates. And in this episode, the choice between these two worlds becomes very real. Our ancillary characters this week are Alan Smythe, Katrina's friend. I have called him ex-boyfriend before, but at this point, I'm not sure they ever were a couple. I think he'd just like it to be that way. Fleming comes back. He's the bank representative that has a huge crush on Lexi. And Justine, Archie's girlfriend, makes a couple of appearances. The episode opens with Archie heading out to meet with Justine at the airport, to the tune of his father nagging him about the damp in the wine cellar. And then, not Justine, what is her name? Katrina is also nagging him before he can even drive away about his responsibilities as landlord. At the airport, he greets Justine, who says with a sad face, "Let's just get this over, and quickly." Not a good start for our handsome Laird. Next we have Hector showing Golly the damp in the basement, which looks more like a foot of water. Hector reaches in and pulls out a Chateau Lafite 55. Now for those of us who aren't collectors of fine wine, that's a legendary vintage from one of France's most famous Bordeaux estates. A bottle like that could easily be worth thousands of pounds, which makes watching it bob around in the cellar water feel a little tragic. Now let me admit, my favorite bottles of wine would run about $6 to $8 each. So I'm not really in the market for Chateau Lafite. I would like to try it. And you know what? Somewhere deep in my heart, I feel like it wouldn't taste that much different. Maybe I'm wrong, and you know what? I'll never know. At the airport cafe, Archie asks if Justine would have come to live at Glenbogle. The words "would have" are extremely important here because they set the tone for a breakup. She says no, her life is in London, and Glenbogle is not for her. She says she'd never have made a Laird's wife. I seriously doubt that. She's very posh, and given the right set of circumstances, I can completely see her as being the epitome of a Laird's wife. Justine goes on to say that Archie has plenty of other candidates vying for his attention. In the dining room, we have Lexi and Molly polishing the silver. Molly is going on about something or other, and it's clear Lexi isn't listening. She's lost in thought about Archie. She knows he went off to see Justine, so she must be a bundle of nerves, wondering whether they will work things out and stay together. Next, a quick scene of Katrina at the hunting lodge sitting at the computer staring at a photo of Archie and Justine. It's very clear what two women are vying for Archie's heart. Justine tells Archie that she has gotten a valuation on the restaurant and she wants to buy Archie out of his share of the business. Archie wants a few days to think it over. She says she'd like nothing better than for him to turn her down and say he's coming back to London with her. She wants their future back. He says he'll call her after the weekend. They kiss and she tells him to come home. She leaves to catch her flight back to London. Alan Smythe calls Katrina and tells her that he might come up this weekend. Katrina says she appreciated that he helped her with the election, but even though they had a snog, I guess that clears up how far it went last week when she went into him in the middle of the night, it hasn't ignited a wild passion. He then asks if the flowers arrived. She thanks him and the call ends. Katrina has no interest in Alan. Give up, mister. Archie stops by Katrina's on the way home and tells her he has a big decision on whether to stay or go. He knows he'll hurt someone either way, his parents or Justine. Suddenly there's a knock at the door, and guess who it is? It's Alan, arriving from Edinburgh. Come on, Alan, she basically told you not to come. He grabs her in an embrace from behind and kisses her cheek as Archie looks on uncomfortably. Alan is also surprised to see Archie there. Hector and Golly are in the front yard having a glass of the 55 Chateau Lafite. They're up to something. They're talking about uneven ground and seem to be walking along the front yard in long strides. Molly comes out and asks what exactly is going on. They say nothing, but we know that's not true. She tells Hector that Archie has been to see Justine and is on his way back. The discussion was of the future, and according to what he decides, will affect everyone. Meanwhile, Alan gives Justine a box of chocolates, and she has a fit and tells him she doesn't want them. She wants peace and quiet and personal space. Instead of being put off by her anger, it apparently turns Alan on. In the library, everyone is having tea as they await Archie's return. By everyone, I mean Hector and Molly, Golly, Duncan, and Lexi. Lexi gives him a cup of tea. Molly asks how Justine is doing, and Hector asks how the cafeteria is. Obviously, he doesn't think much of Archie's restaurant business. Fleming suddenly walks in, and he's back to go over the estate's finances. It appears his boss found out that he let the MacDonalds extend their credit and was furious with Fleming. He tells Archie he's sorry, but he will have to produce what he calls a wedge of dosh. I suppose this means a bunch of cash. Archie says he's thinking of selling his share of the restaurant. He asks him to keep this information private as he hasn't made his mind up. However, something tells me Fleming's arrival is pushing Archie in a particular direction. As Hector goes up to bed in his dressing gown, carrying a book and yet another glass of what I presume is the Chateau Lafite, he tells Archie to have a look at that bit of damp in the wine and spirit department. Fleming and Archie go down to the wine cellar where they see that bit of damp is more like a lake. Duncan is carrying the tray of tea things back to the kitchen when he overhears Fleming and Lexi. He gets the wrong end of the stick and thinks that something is going on between the two of them. He gets it in his head that when Lexi went to London a few days ago, she was actually going to see him instead of going to Archie's restaurant. In the wine cellar, a man is inspecting the situation and advises Archie that they need to pump all the water into the lock. He also discovers a crack in a load-bearing wall. He tells Archie that one whole wing of the house is sinking. He advises him to get everyone out of the house while the builders repair the situation and tells Archie that it will probably cost somewhere in the range of 6 figures. If I were Archie, I'd feel hopeless at this point. The problems just keep mounting. The surveyor says insurance companies are good with this sort of thing, and Archie replies they are if you have a policy with them. Archie looks completely defeated. Meanwhile, Hector and Molly are dancing by the lock to the tune of Fly Me to the Moon. Unfortunately, their lovely way of just ignoring problems has gotten them into this very dire situation. Archie, sitting in a boat on the lock, attempts to call Justine with no success. He rows as he tries to clear his head. Meanwhile, Fleming asks Lexi if she wants to take a turn around the lock. She says she has to cook dinner, and he says he'll peel potatoes for her. He mentions not having played Swallows in Amazon tenants in years. This is a reference to a children's book called Swallows and Amazons by Arthur Ransom. It's a story about two groups of children who sail boats, camp, and have adventures during their holidays in England's Lake District. The two groups of children are referred to as the Swallows and the Amazons. Sounds like a sweet little book series. Molly and Hector continue dancing, and she mentions having a party for their upcoming anniversary. Hector seems to brush off the idea as if it's silly and they don't need one. Along comes Archie to tell them about the work that needs to be done on the house and that they'll need to move out for a bit. He tells them the banker insisting on payment and reveals his thoughts of letting Justine buy him out of the restaurant. They argue, with Molly telling him he must make the decision that is best for him, and Hector saying he is Laird and Glenbogle is his responsibility. Katrina stops by to complain to Archie about problems with his tenants' properties. Archie has completely had it with everyone coming to him with problems. Of course, he is Laird, that is his job, I guess. But he takes Katrina down to the cellar to show her his big problem with the water damage. Fleming rows out onto the lock, and very quickly there's a leak in his boat and he's sinking. Meanwhile, standing on the bank is Duncan with an electric screwdriver, smiling. Fleming hasn't gone too far, because with all his yelling for help, when he stands up, he's only in knee-deep water. So, at least Duncan wasn't trying to kill him. At dinner, Fleming has the idea for Kill Willie to buy Glenbogle. Hector says over his dead body. Molly thinks it's a good idea, surprisingly. Hector leaves the room in a huff. Lexi finds Duncan up to no good and tells him dinner is on the table. She leaves, and he lifts a large container of ketchup. Lexi comes back in, and Duncan hides the ketchup behind his back. And we wonder what he's up to. Next, we hear the sound of Italian music. Imagine the film The Godfather, and if you've seen it, you know where this is heading. We have Fleming in bed, tossing and turning, and he wakes up and sees blood all over his hands. He lifts the sheets, and there in bed is one of the mounted deer heads. If you haven't seen the film, this is a reference to the scene where a Hollywood producer has gone against the wishes of the Corleone family. He wakes up in the night to find the bloody head of his prized racehorse. That was a horrifying, disturbing moment. Why am I laughing? I'm just imagining Fleming with ketchup all over his hands. And also, as a person who has experience with deer hunters and how they get their deer heads and deer racks mounted so lovingly, they would never mess them up with a bunch of ketchup. That just wouldn't happen. Alan Smythe is still at Katrina's. He's making breakfast and also making a mess. Katrina is very angry and has an outburst and tells Alan she never asked him to come. Well, Alan, who doesn't seem to know how to read the room, says he's thinking of buying a property nearby so they can be together. We've all probably had someone like that in our lives, whether it was someone who wanted to be your friend or a boyfriend or girlfriend that just didn't get the hint that you're not on the same page. Next, we find Golly in the front yard with a tape measure. Archie asks what he's doing, to which Golly says he's measuring the grass. Sure, Golly, sure you are. Katrina's got wind that Archie's thinking of selling Glenbogle and all the properties that go with it, and she is furious. Meanwhile, Hector is staging a protest about the proposed sale of the property by sitting out on the balcony outside Archie's bedroom, refusing to eat anything, and reading Country Life magazines. Katrina tells Lexi that all men are bampods. They have a good old chinwag, and a story is told by Katrina about how Golly got that nickname. Now, this story is kind of naughty, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Apparently, years ago, he took a bonny young lass to a dance. He charmed the socks off her and took her down by the river for what Katrina calls a canoodle. She unbuttoned her frock and he his trousers, and she was so amazed by what confronted her, she cried out, "Golly!" At that very moment, Golly walks into the kitchen brandishing the tape measure, and Katrina and Lexi burst out laughing. Archie wants Duncan to apologize to Fleming for the deer head shenanigans. Duncan says he's fond of Lexi and that Fleming has despoiled her. Archie says that's impossible because Lexi was with him the whole time they were in London, that they even shared a sleeping compartment. Mind you, the whole time Fleming is just outside the door, eavesdropping on everything. He bursts in when he finds out about Archie and Lexi in the sleeping compartment, and he's furious at Archie. He and Duncan let Archie have it. It seems like everyone's letting Archie have it. And then Duncan apologizes to Fleming for the deer incident. Duncan invites Fleming to go and get pished. I'm sure you all remember what that word means. We have a wonderful scene with Molly and Archie. He wonders why he can never do anything right. She comforts him and hugs him. She says in her eyes he could never do anything wrong. And if for all the mothers out there, I'm sure that will ring especially true. I can take that thought a step further because my partner is Lebanese, and he's always told me that there is a saying in Arabic that even a monkey is a gazelle in its mother's eyes. I love that. Next, Fleming and Duncan confront Lexi with what they've learned about her weekend in London with Archie. Lexi's furious and tells Archie she will never speak to him again for telling them about that, at least not until he makes everything right. Then she climbs up on the balcony with Hector to join the protest. Katrina tries to talk to Archie, and he starts shouting at her and tells her to get lost, and she slaps him on the arm. Then she climbs onto the balcony. It's getting pretty crowded up there. Later, Golly goes fly fishing, and Archie joins him, not to fish, but he's sitting on a rock in the middle of the river, and he's pretty depressed at this point. Golly tells Archie to just follow his heart. Duncan and Fleming are commiserating at a pub called the Stag and Stalker. They are clearly pished, and Alan, who's also there, offers to buy them a drink, just what they need. Back at Glenbogle, Lexi is sending up a basket of food for Hector, who I thought said he wasn't eating. She says she's made banana and chutney sarnies. Hector says he loves a nana sarnie. A sarnie, by the way, is another UK word for sandwich. And if you're wondering what chutney is, I looked that up, and something similar in the US would be pepper jelly. And when I think about banana and pepper jelly, I might have to try that. Yet another food I have to try. I don't need any more. The men leave the pub, and as Alan is walking back to Katrina's, he meets her on the road and drunkenly asks her to marry him. She tells him she's very fond of him, but she doesn't love him and can't possibly marry him. Alan turns ugly. That doesn't surprise me. And says she must have the hots for Archie, and that he hears he has had his way with the staff. Katrina says she's already heard. She angrily tells Alan goodbye. Back on the balcony, we find Lexi and Hector eating the banana sarnies. Inside, we see Archie phoning Justine. He comes out, and everyone's on the balcony. By everyone, I mean Hector, Lexi, Katrina, Duncan, and Fleming. They all start shouting, "Archie out! Archie out!" He tells them to be quiet and come down as he has a few things to say. We also see some men walking by Molly with lumber, and she asks Hector what is going on. He says Golly will tell her all about it, and they go inside to see what Archie has to say. Archie apologizes to Lexi and clears up the misunderstanding, and says he has nothing happened to be ashamed of or that warrants an explanation. He thanks Katrina for her help and is sorry he hasn't seemed grateful. He says he hopes he always has her support and respect. He goes on to say he isn't selling out to kill Willie. He is selling his share of the restaurant to Justine. This should be enough to pay down the debt and make Glenbogle viable. Hector says, "That's my boy." He says he hopes they will all help him and will all be his friends. Katrina then stands up and says that he doesn't have to blow all of his money, and that they have come up with a plan to sell the properties in the village to the tenants. She's already lined up mortgages for the tenants with Fleming. She says it keeps his options open, including with Justine. She further says this was all his father's idea. Good old Hector. Outside at night, we see what Hector and Golly have been up to. Everyone is out there, and he toasts Molly, the loveliest girl in the Highlands, and his dear wife of 40 years. Then we see what all the lumber was for. First of all, there's a huge fireworks display, and a giant frame has been erected that displays 2 big hearts that say H&M 40. Molly got her party after all. He tells her he wanted to buy her a ruby, but fireworks were cheaper. Lexi and Archie are holding sparklers, and Archie says he hopes she hasn't fallen for him. She says, don't be daft, but one of these fine days they're going to finish what they started. Then she goes off arm in arm with Duncan and Fleming. Per usual, we end the episode with Archie and Katrina. They begin to squabble, but Archie turns it around and thanks Katrina for what she did for him and Justine. He says that the other way may have been easy when his decision was one where he had to save Glenbogle for his family and settle himself into Glenbogle for good. Now, he again has to decide whether he's going back to London and Justine. He further says he has to decide what to do about he and Justine or he and Katrina. Katrina asked if there is such a thing as me and you. Then he leans in to kiss her as headlights illuminate the two of them, and Justine gets out of a car and walks towards him. He goes towards her, and she says she had to come, that she can't lose him. She says maybe she can move to Glenbogle. Archie is clearly surprised. The episode ends with a shot of the fireworks. How appropriate. Now, you know I like to do the animal sighting segment, and this episode sort of let me down, but there was some mention of animals. At one point, after Archie has gone to see Justine at the airport in the beginning of the episode, Molly runs out of the house to Hector and tells him that Archie's on his way back. Somebody apparently had called her and said that he'd just passed the llama farm. Well, that got me all excited. I thought I was going to see some llamas, but it wasn't to be. We also have golly fishing, so there was some fly fishing. And I can't forget the taxidermy deer head that was in Fleming's bed. It was a living, breathing animal at one time. And now it's time for our Across the Pond translations. Katrina at one point says that all men are bampots. And a bampot, spelled B-A-M-P-O-T, is a Scottish term for someone who's a bit of a fool or an idiot. We had she and Lexi having a chinwag, and that's simply a good long chat. Pished came up again, which is a Scottish slang for quite drunk. And as I told you before about the sarnie, S-A-R-N-I-E, that is another slang for sandwich. And in closing out this season of Monarch of the Glen, and what a way to close season 1, Archie still has a choice to make. I had forgotten, and I really thought this episode was the end of Justine. But he still has to choose between London or Glenbogle, Justine or Katrina, or should we even throw in Lexi into the mix? Does he choose between duty or love? We'll have to wait until next season to see how it all unfolds. Now, before I close out this season, I wanted to do a segment on my favorite episode of season 1, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I don't have a favorite episode. I have favorite moments that were either funny or touching that stood out to me in each episode, so I'll just go over that. In episode 1, what comes to mind first is Hector's jet ski accident. And my favorite scene was probably when he was in bed and Molly was there by his bedside and Lexi comes in carrying his breakfast and he's demanding, "Where are my Marmite soldiers?" And that was the first time I'd ever heard about Marmite soldiers. And I still plan on trying them and getting any of my family who will indulge me to try them also. In episode 2, we had Fleming coming to collect some payment for the Glenbogle debt, and I loved his interaction with Lexi and their flirting back and forth and how Duncan ended up getting into a fight with Fleming over Lexi. That was a lot of fun. In episode 3, we had the Glenbogle ball. That was a highlight of the whole season. I loved all the Scottish music, the dance that Golly did, that was called the Gilly Callum over the swords on the floor, and the women's ball gowns and the men's kilts. And I learned so much about what each piece of the kilt, I don't want to say costume, but I don't really know what else to call it, and how many different pieces go along with creating that look. It was a lot of fun to learn about that. In episode 4, Harold Xavier arrives, and he's the genealogist, and ultimately we get to the bottom of who Katrina's biological father is, and that was so touching, and I didn't see it coming. In episode 5, we meet Archie's sister, Lizzie, and her interesting boyfriend. And probably, though, my favorite part of the episode was the storyline around Golly and his lost manhood, so to speak, and the women that were coming out of the woodwork looking for him. I did not know Golly was such a ladies' man until this episode. In episode 6, we had the annual boat race between Kilwilly's estate and Glenbogle, and the part I loved most was the legend of Red Bonnet. There was a lot of mystery woven throughout the episode about that, and that brought to mind the story that I shared with you that my grandmother had told me, which isn't a legend, it is truth. Believe it or don't, but I will always believe it, and so will my sisters. Episode 7 was all about the arrival of the Glorious 12th, the opening of hunting season, and we learned about the red grouse and everything that goes along with this special day. Another part of the episode I really enjoyed was when Archie and Lexi took the grouse to London, and then on their way back they had a kiss. That's the start of something between them, I think, and I enjoyed that storyline as well. And number 8 rounded out the season, and probably my favorite part of that was the sweet moments between Hector and Molly, and ending with their anniversary party that she wasn't expecting, fireworks and everything. It was really beautiful, and you can see the love between those two, even though Hector gives her a run for her money sometimes. And that ends this episode. It's gone on a little longer than I planned it to. I think almost 30 minutes. I apologize for that. But I do thank you for joining me on this wild ride of season 1. It's been so much fun, and I appreciate each and every one of you that listen to any of my episodes. I just hope it brings you some joy. As always, after you watch an episode, if you'll like, subscribe, or leave a review, that helps me a lot. And you can always reach me at thedenoфepisodes@yahoo.com. I'm Marlo Fox, and until next time, keep the kettle on and the episodes rolling.